This video is titled God's Will and is part of the expansion pack accompanying the video, How It All Ends. Let me start by saying I know little of theology or hermeneutics, but the subject of God has come up enough times in my discussions with people about global climate change that I want to address it briefly here, without delving into the fundamental questions of faith. I certainly have no answers, but only questions, which might have some bearing on how you feel about climate change and your personal relationship to it. I recently had a very interesting conversation with an optometrist about climate change. We were sincerely asking what the other thought about it, since she knows I teach science and she hasn't looked into it too much, and I'm always curious about the process by which people arrive at the opinions they hold, particularly because she's technically trained. She's devoutly religious, Christian, and it turns out that she feels that global climate change is probably God's will, perhaps in punishment for the sins of mankind. I don't share that conviction, but it seemed fair enough to me. When I asked why she thought that, it sparked a question in my mind, though. Because she said that the issue was so big, so, global, that it seemed beyond the purview of humankind and could only be in the realm of a higher being. I wanted to understand better how she made that judgment, so I asked her a hypothetical question to try to elicit the principles underlying her belief. I said, suppose you live on a river and you catch and eat the fish from the river. If you eventually noticed that there were fewer and fewer fish, and then that the water started to smell, and then dead fish turned up, you might go looking upstream. And say you found someone had installed a pipeline that's dumping foul-smelling stuff into the river. You wouldn't call the dead fish God's will and ignore it. You'd tell that guy upstream to knock it off. She agreed with that. If he assured you that it's not his stuff that's causing the fish to die, you might even hire a water quality expert to come out and analyze the water, and you'd probably weight his statements about the foul-smelling stuff more heavily than those from the guy with the pipeline. She agreed with that too. So I asked, what's the difference between this situation and global climate change? Her answer was, again, that it's just so big, it's hard to imagine it in the hands of humans and quite easy to imagine it in the hands of God. She agreed that she wouldn't consider the dead fish to be God's will, or at least not in the sense that she wouldn't take action to change the situation. I mean, you don't have to be a strict Calvinist to believe that, in a certain sense, everything is God's will. So I gave a larger version of the fish scenario. Say, instead of it being a local river, it's an entire region that's affected, like the acid rain caused by the industrial emissions in the northeastern U.S. She agreed, again, that she'd do something to get the emitters to stop, because the phenomenon was clearly the direct result of human action, and it was harming people, both directly and indirectly. So I asked, if we keep scaling the issue up, where is the line where it goes from being of humans, and therefore subject to our judgment and our actions, to being of God, and therefore subject to only prayer? She hadn't really thought about it like that before, and she didn't have a ready answer, and that's where the conversation ended. Since then, I've thought about it a lot, and I think perhaps what might be causing the blurring is that with the fish, it's clear to our intuition that the problem is caused by humans. And when you jump straight to the globe, your intuition now opposes the idea that the problem could be caused by humans. It's just so big and we're so small. As my dad put it, intellectually he believes the scientists and all, but at a gut level, he still just doesn't believe that we can change the planet just by driving cars around. We're just too small. Which is why I scaled the same problem up gradually, starting with the fish in the river, which our intuition could solve, and going all the way up to the globe, looking for at what point does the issue cross the line from being of humans to being of God. And that's also why I introduced the idea of the water quality expert. He represents someone whose judgment about the physical situation you trust, because he's studied long and hard, and he has lots of experience. Well, with climate change, that's exactly the role that the scientists play. And the statements of AAAS and NAS really leave no question as to their judgment of whether humans are playing a role or not in global climate change. It is, of course, correct to say that the climate has changed often without us ever playing a part, but that doesn't mean we're not the ones doing it now. If you watch the videos How It All Ends, The Mechanics of Climate Change, and Scare Tactics, you may see that it's not too hard to upgrade your intuition so that it no longer opposes the conclusions of scientists when they say that it is highly likely that the observed warming of the globe is driven primarily by human activities. It worked for my dad to see those statements, and when I explained the mechanics of it to him. Now his guts agree with his head, and all's well at the home. So if you've thought in the past that global warming might be God's will, or even perhaps the start of end times, I don't have any answers for you. But I would respectfully request, for the benefit of all, that you ask yourself the question about the fish in the river. Would you consider it God's will and continue fishing, or would you ask your upstream neighbor to stop putting those things in the river that you both share? And then make the scenario slightly larger and ask the question again. And as you keep making it larger, watch and ask yourself where in that progression does the issue go from being a human caused problem that we can and want to address to being the will of God, which we can't. Because with 6 billion amazingly varied people, we may not all share the same faith, but we definitely share the same planet.